My name is Morgan Ingram. I am 17 years old. 3 months ago, my stepmother asked me to sit down at the kitchen table and told me to sign over the $400,000 that my late mother left for me. My father stood behind her with his arms crossed and said, "She is your family now. Your mother would have wanted this." I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I stayed completely silent. The next morning, I handed them a sealed envelope from my mother's lawyer. What was inside that envelope made my father cry for the first time in his life. It was not because of the money, but because of what my mother had written about him. These were words she had kept sealed for years, waiting for the exact moment when he would need to hear them. Before I explain what happened next, if this story connects with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly feel a connection. I would also like to know where you are watching from, so leave a comment and tell me your location and what time it is where you are. Now, let me take you back 6 months to the day my mother passed away. My mother died on a Tuesday. The sun was shining brightly, and I remember feeling angry about that. Her name was Claire Ingram. She was 43 years old and had worked as a 4th-grade teacher at Millbrook Elementary for 16 years. She was the kind of teacher who stayed after school to cut construction paper and who bought winter coats for students whose parents could not afford them. She taught me how to read before I even started kindergarten. She taught me how to write thank you cards by hand. She also taught me that silence can sometimes say more than words. The cancer was diagnosed 2 years before that Tuesday. It was stage 3 lung cancer. She had never smoked in her life. The doctor said that sometimes it just happens. She responded by saying, "Then we deal with it." And she did. For 23 months, she faced it with strength. She had chemotherapy on Thursdays, taught school from Monday through Wednesday, and graded papers while lying in her hospital bed with an IV in her left arm and a red pen in her right hand. I would sit next to her doing my homework, pretending that I could not hear the sound of the machines. During the last week, she could barely speak, but she pulled me close. Her hand was so thin that I could feel every bone. She whispered something that I did not fully understand at the time. "Everything you need is with Drayton. Promise me you will call her." I did not know who Drayton was. I did not understand what she meant by everything. I just held her hand tightly and said, "I promise, Mom." She smiled. It was small, tired, and still perfect. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with sunlight coming through the window as if nothing was wrong in that room, she passed away. I was the only person there. My father had not visited even once in 2 years. Not when she was first diagnosed. Not when she lost her hair. Not when she sold our house to cover medical costs. Not even once. The nurses cried more than I did. Mrs. Patterson from across the street brought flowers to a room that no longer needed them. My Aunt June drove 3 hours from County Pepper and held me in the hospital hallway while I was shaking. The next day, my father sent me a text message. "Sorry for your loss." It felt like something you would send to a coworker, not to your own child. It felt like he was talking about someone he barely knew. That detail is important, and you will understand why later. The funeral was small. There were my mother's coworkers from school, a few neighbors, my Aunt June, who is my mother's younger sister, and me. My father arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a tie I had never seen before. He brought Valerie Hartwell, his wife of 6 years. She is the woman he married 14 months after leaving my mother and me. She wore a black dress and had an expression that made it clear she did not want to be there. She did not even sign the guest book. At 17 years old, here is the truth about my situation. I had nowhere else to go. In the state of Virginia, a minor must have a legal guardian. My Aunt June applied, but the court denied her request. My biological father had legal priority. Richard Ingram, 45 years old, employed, married, and living in a 3-bedroom house in Grover, Virginia. So I packed 2 suitcases and moved into the home of a man I had barely spoken to in 8 years. The house was already full. Richard and Valerie had the master bedroom. Brianna, Valerie's 16-year-old daughter, had the second bedroom. Kyle, Valerie's 14-year-old son, had the third bedroom. My space was a converted storage area at the end of the hallway. It had a camp cot, a folding table, and a single exposed light bulb above. My suitcases did not fit properly, so I stacked them in the corner and sat on the cot, listening to the sound of Kyle's video game coming through the wall. On that first night, I heard Valerie in the kitchen. She was not speaking to my father directly. She was speaking about me. "How long until the trust situation gets sorted?" My father responded, but I could not hear his words clearly. Then Valerie said, "She has only been here for 2 days and already acts like she owns the place." I pulled my mother's blanket over my shoulders. I did not cry. I simply remembered what she said. People show you who they are very early. You should believe them. 1 week later, during dinner, Valerie made chicken casserole and served everyone before serving me. I did not say anything. I ate what was left in the dish and cleaned my own plate afterward. Halfway through the meal, Valerie started talking about money. She did not look at me. She spoke to Richard. Brianna's first choice school costs $55,000 a year. The roof is leaking again. The Honda needs a transmission, and my visa bill is already too high. Richard ate slowly, then turned to me. His voice sounded careful, as if he had practiced what he was going to say. Your mom left you some money, right? We should talk about that as a family. I put my fork down and said, it isn't a trust. I do not have access to it yet. Valerie leaned forward and said, trusts can be changed. We already looked it up. When she said we, it made it clear that this was not a casual discussion. It was planned. They had talked about it before. Maybe for several days. Maybe even before I moved in. Possibly even before the funeral. I picked up my plate, walked to the sink, rinsed it, dried it, and put it away. Morgan, Richard said, we are talking to you. I replied, I heard you. I just do not have anything else to say. Then I went to my room, sat on the cot, and opened the small wooden box I had brought from my mother's house. Inside were her reading glasses, a birthday card she had given me when I turned 15, and a folded piece of paper with a phone number written on it. Next to the number was a name in my mother's handwriting, Patricia Drayton, Esquire. I did not call that night. I did not yet understand how serious things would become. I ran my thumb over the ink and thought, Mom, what did you know that I do not? The answer was everything. 2 weeks later, I came downstairs for breakfast and saw a stack of papers placed on the kitchen table. The top page had sections highlighted in yellow. The heading read, Petition for Guardianship of a Minor's Estate, Commonwealth of Virginia. Valerie was standing at the counter pouring coffee, and she did not look up. I picked up the papers and read the first paragraph. Then I read it again to make sure I understood it correctly. Richard walked into the room dressed for work. He saw me holding the documents and cleared his throat. It is just paperwork, he said. Standard procedure. I'm your legal guardian, then I should have a say in your finances. It is for your own good, Morgan. I looked straight at him and said, you want to control Mom's trust? He replied, I want to protect you. Then he picked up his keys and added, you are 17. You do not understand how money works. I answered, Mom understood. That is why she created it this way. He left for work without saying anything else. Valerie took a sip of her coffee and looked at me over the edge of her cup with a small smile. It was the kind of smile that made it clear that, in her mind, everything was already decided. After school, I went to the library. I was not there for my shift. I went to the back room where it is quiet and the Wi-Fi works well. I sat in the corner and called the one person I had been avoiding since the funeral. My Aunt June answered on the first ring. Honey, I have been waiting for your call. I said, they are filing for guardianship of Mom's estate. My voice broke for the first time since the funeral. June was silent for 3 seconds, then she asked, can you come to my place on Saturday? I said, yes. She replied, good. There is someone you need to meet. Her name is Patricia Drayton. She is your mother's attorney. For the first time in weeks, I felt some relief in my chest. My mother had spoken that name before she died, and now it was becoming real. Patricia Drayton's office was located above a hardware store on Main Street in Culpeper. It was a small town, a small building, and a small sign outside. However, the woman sitting behind the desk was not small in any way. She was 58 years old, with silver hair and reading glasses hanging on a chain. She looked at me in a way that made it seem like she had been expecting me for a long time. Sit down, Morgan. Your mother told me a lot about you. My Aunt June sat beside me. Drayton opened a folder that was thick, organized, and filled with tabs. Your mother created an irrevocable trust 18 months before she passed away. She named me as the trustee. You are the only beneficiary. She paused and asked, do you understand what irrevocable means? I answered, it cannot be changed. She said, correct. Not by your father, not by his wife, and not by any court petition for guardianship, because the trust already has a named trustee, which is me. I finally exhaled. I did not realize I had been holding my breath. The trust contained $400,000. It included $250,000 from my mother's life insurance, $95,000 from her savings, and $55,000 from the sale of our house. She sold the house 6 months before she died and moved us into a rental. At that time, I believed it was because of medical expenses. Now I understood that she was protecting me. Drayton reached into her desk drawer and took out a sealed envelope. It was cream-colored, made of thick paper, and had my mother's handwriting on the front. It said, for Richard when the time comes. Drayton said, your mother gave me this with very clear instructions. She asked that you give it to your father, but only when the moment is right. You will know when that moment comes. I held the envelope in my hands. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Drayton continued, your mother did not simply hope things would work out, Morgan. She prepared for the worst, and she was correct to do so. When I returned home that evening, I found my belongings in the garage. Not everything, but the personal items that mattered most. There was a box of my mother's photographs, her favorite coffee mug with the chipped handle that she never threw away, my journal, and the bracelet she had worn every day for 20 years. It was a thin silver chain with a small locket. All of these items were pushed into a black trash bag sitting on the concrete floor next to a bag of lawn clippings. Kyle was in the living room playing his video game. Valerie was sitting on the couch folding laundry. I stood in the doorway holding the trash bag and asked, "Where are my things?" Valerie did not even look up. She said, "We needed the space. Kyle needs a gaming room." I said, "These are my mother's things. Her jewelry. Her photos." She replied, "And this is my house. You are living here for free. The least you can do is not take up space." I opened the bag and found the bracelet tangled in a scarf. The locket was open. Inside it was a picture of me when I was 4 years old, sitting on my mother's lap. The photo was damp, as if something had spilled on it. I closed the locket, placed the bracelet on my wrist, and felt the clasp lock into place. I said, very calmly, "You can take my room. You can take my place at the table. But you do not get to throw my mother in the trash." Valerie looked at me for the first time. There was a brief change in her expression. It could have been surprise, or maybe she realized she had gone too far. Then she went back to folding laundry. Kyle walked past the garage on his way to the kitchen and saw me sitting on the floor, going through the bag. He slowed down, but he did not say anything. Even he seemed to understand that this moment was not something to joke about. That night, I spread the photographs across my camp cot. I separated the damaged ones from the ones that were still in good condition. 11 photos were ruined. The edges were curled, and the colors had started to fade. The rest I placed into a 1-gallon Ziploc bag and hid inside my suitcase. From that night on, I wore the bracelet at all times. I slept with it and even wore it in the shower. I was not going to take it off until I felt safe again. I sent a message to my Aunt June. "They threw out Mom's things. I need to leave this place." She replied within 30 seconds. 7 months, honey. You will turn 18 in 7 months. We will get you through this. 7 months. I started counting each day. The confrontation happened on a Thursday. After dinner, Richard called me into the living room. Valerie was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, legs crossed, and her expression firm. I could tell she had been waiting for this moment. She had barely spoken during dinner, saving everything for this conversation. "Sit down, Morgan." I sat down. Richard said, "We need that money. Brianna's college, the roof, everything. Your stepmother has been holding this family together, and we are struggling." I replied, "That money is not mine to give. It is in a trust." He said, "It is your trust. You can talk to the lawyer and tell her to release it." I said, "No." Valerie uncrossed her arms and said, "Your mother would not want you to act this selfish." I looked at her, then at my father, and said, "You do not get to tell me what my mother wanted. You left her." The room became completely silent. My father's face changed. It was not exactly anger. It looked more like something deeper, something like shame hidden behind authority. He said, "I am still your father." I replied, "Then act like one." There was silence for 10 seconds. Valerie was the one who broke the silence. "This is exactly what I have been talking about. There is no respect and no gratitude. We feed her, we give her a place to live, and she sits there acting like a queen sitting on a pile of money." Richard rubbed his face with both of his hands. When he looked up again, his expression had changed and his eyes looked cold. "If you cannot be part of this family, Morgan, then maybe this is not the right home for you." There it was, clear and direct. It was a threat. Either I agreed with them or I would be forced out. I was a 17-year-old girl with nowhere else to go. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I kept them at my sides. "You left Mom when she was healthy. You did not come back when she was dying. And now you want her money." I walked back to my room and closed the door quietly, just the way my mother always would have done. The phone call started the very next day. Valerie called Richard's mother, Grandma Shirley. Then she called Aunt Linda, Richard's older sister. After that, she called Uncle Dean, his younger brother. She told each of them the same story, just with small changes. Morgan is sitting on a large amount of money while the family is struggling. She refuses to help. She is ungrateful. She is turning into her mother. That last part was meant to sound like an insult. For me, it was the greatest compliment anyone could give. Grandma Shirley was the first one to call me. "Morgan, your father is feeding you and giving you a place to stay. The least you can do is help the family." I said, "Hello, Grandma. The money is in a trust. I do not legally have access to it." She replied, "Then remove it from the trust. Talk to the lawyer." I said, "That is not how it works." She answered, "Your mother raised you better than this. She would be ashamed." I held the phone away from my ear and let her words pass without reacting. Then I said, "I love you, Grandma. I have to go. Aunt Linda sent me a message. Do not be that kind of kid, Morgan. Family helps family." I did not reply. Uncle Dean did not call or send a message at all. At that time, I thought it was strange. Everyone else in the family had shared their opinions. They pressured me, gave advice, and judged me. Dean stayed silent. I did not yet understand that silence can also carry a message. I started spending more time at the library, not only for my job of shelving books 3 days a week, but also for the quiet. In the back room, there was a table by the window where no one bothered me. Mrs. Cooper, the head librarian, had known my mother. They had worked together on the elementary school reading program. She never asked me any questions. She simply left the back room unlocked after hours and acted like she did not notice that I stayed there. I would sit at that table doing my homework, watching the parking lot slowly empty, and listening to the building settle as it got quieter. Sometimes I wrote in my journal. I had started new entries because the old ones were damaged by water. I wrote letters to my mother that I would never send. I told her about Valerie, about the kitchen table conversations, and about the phone calls from Grandma Shirley. I wrote as if she could read them. Maybe she could. That library became the only place where no one asked anything from me. No one told me that I owed them something. No one used my mother's name to try to take what she had left for me. I was 17 years old. I felt alone, even though I was surrounded by people. And I was starting to feel like I could not breathe. Kyle made things worse in a personal way. He was 14 years old and had a temper like his mother. He reacted quickly and loudly. He had already taken my charger, used my headphones without asking, and changed the Wi-Fi password twice. I bought a new charger. I let the headphones go. I asked Brianna for the Wi-Fi password. But the journal was different. One day, I came home from the library and found it on the kitchen counter. The pages were open and wet. A glass of water had been knocked over onto the pages where I had written letters to my mother. These were letters I never sent. They were written at night while I sat on my camp cot, writing things I could not say out loud. Kyle was sitting at the table eating chips. "Oops," he said, without even looking at me. I picked up the journal and carefully separated the wet pages. Some of the ink had spread. Some of the words were completely gone. I did not yell. I did not cry. I took the journal back to my room. I used my phone to take pictures of every page and saved them in a cloud folder. Then I placed the journal in a Ziploc bag and put it inside my suitcase. That evening, Kyle had friends over. They were in the living room. As I walked past them to go into the kitchen, Kyle pointed at me and said, "That is our charity case. Her mom died, and now she lives in a closet." His friends laughed. I kept walking. Later, I was sitting in my room with the door slightly open when I heard a soft knock. Brianna was standing in the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself. "I am sorry about Kyle," she said quietly. "He is rude. This is not your fault." She looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded and walked away. My mother went through 2 years of chemotherapy without ever complaining. I could handle a 14-year-old with a glass of water. I need to pause here for a moment. When I look back now, I sometimes ask myself if it would have been easier to just give them the money, leave everything behind, and start over somewhere else. I want you to think about this and answer honestly. Have you ever been pressured by your own family to give up something that was meant only for you? At this point in my story, I had no idea what was about to happen next. If you are still following along, make sure to subscribe, because the next part is where everything changes. Saturday morning, I was at Aunt June's kitchen. There was coffee, toast, and a conversation that would change everything. June is 39 years old and works as a nurse at Culpeper Regional Hospital. She has the same dark brown eyes as my mother, steady and calm. She had worked a double shift the night before, but she still woke up early to make breakfast. "Your mother started the trust right after her diagnosis," June said as she poured cream into her coffee. 18 months before she passed away, she sat at my kitchen table, this same table, with a legal pad and wrote down everything she owned. I asked, "Why did she not tell me?" June answered, "You were 15, Morgan. She did not want you to carry that responsibility." June placed her mug on the table and looked at me. She told me something that I will never forget. She said, "Richard will remarry, and the person he chooses will come after this money. I know him." I looked down at my hands. My mother's bracelet reflected the light. June spoke softly. "She did not hate your father. She just understood him. She knew he was weak. She knew he would convince himself that sharing the money was the right thing to do. And she knew he would let someone else make that decision for him. So she made the decision first." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense." June reached across the table and held my hand. "Your mother wrote 3 letters. One was for you, and Ms. Drayton already gave you that one. One is for Richard. That is the sealed envelope. And one is for Drayton herself, with instructions. I asked, what kind of instructions? June replied, legal instructions. What to do if Richard filed a case in court? What to do if someone tried to pretend to be your legal guardian? What to do if the situation became worse? June paused. Vale. Your mother spent her final year planning for your future, not for her own. I held her hand tighter. Outside the window, I could hear birds singing. It sounded like the kind of thing my mother would have pointed out to me. I found the proof on a Monday. I was searching for a pen in the kitchen drawer, the one filled with random items, where Valerie kept takeout menus, old batteries, and, as I discovered, bank correspondence. The letter was from First National Trust Services. It was addressed to the office of Patricia Drayton, but a copy had also been sent to the house. That is standard procedure for any request related to a minor's account. The letter stated that a request had been submitted by Valerie Ingram, listed as the legal guardian of Morgan Ingram, asking for a complete account summary and instructions for withdrawing money from the trust. The request had been denied. The letter clearly referenced the trust agreement. All inquiries must go through the assigned trustee. Valerie had contacted the bank. She had identified herself as my legal guardian. She had tried to gain access to my mother's trust. My hands did not shake. I did not feel anger. I felt something colder. I felt clarity. I used my phone to take pictures of the letter, both sides, and the envelope, including the postmark and address. Then I placed everything back in the drawer exactly as I had found it. That evening, I sent the photos to Ms. Drayton with one short message. She contacted the bank and claimed to be my guardian. Drayton replied within an hour. This is exactly what your mother expected. I have documented everything. Leave the original letter where it is. Do not let them know that you have seen it. Then she sent another message. I am going to arrange a meeting. Your father and his wife need to hear the legal facts directly from me. It is time. I put my phone down and looked out the window. Valerie was outside in the backyard, laughing at something on her phone. She had no idea what she had started. My mother had expected this exact situation. She had written instructions for it. Every single step had already been planned. The Sunday dinner at Grandma Shirley's house became Valerie's main performance. Everyone was there. Shirley sat at the head of the table. Aunt Linda and her husband Gary were seated beside her. Uncle Dean was there, quiet as always. Richard, Valerie, Brianna, Kyle, and I were all present, with me sitting at the corner closest to the door. The meal was pot roast with potatoes. The small talk lasted for 12 minutes. Then Valerie placed her fork down, pressed a tissue to her eye, and began speaking. I have tried so hard. Her voice broke at the exact moment. I opened my home to Morgan. I treated her like my own child, but she refuses to be part of this family. Linda looked at me with an expression that mixed pity with judgment. Valerie continued, she is sitting on money that her dead mother left while we struggle just to cover basic expenses. Richard works 60 hours every week. I gave up my career to raise these children. And Morgan will not even help pay for Brianna's college. Grandma Shirley placed her knife down. Morgan, your father has done everything for you. Do you not think it is time for you to give something back? I held my fork tightly. My mother's bracelet pressed against my wrist. Linda leaned forward and said, Claire would have wanted you to help your siblings. They are your family now. No one sitting at that table had attended my mother's funeral except for me and my father. Not Shirley, not Linda, not Dean. They had not sent flowers. They had not called. Some of them had never even met my mother, and if they had, it was once many years ago at a gathering they likely did not remember. And now they were telling me what my mother would have wanted. I looked around the table. The pot roast was getting cold on 8 plates. On the wall behind Shirley, there was a framed family photo. It showed Richard at 12, Linda at 15, and Dean at 8. There was no picture of me. I had never even been inside this house until 3 months ago. Valerie pressed the tissue to her face again and looked at me as if she were the one being wronged. Richard kept his eyes on his plate. Brianna stared at the salt shaker. Kyle was texting under the table. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, a voice came from the other end of the table. Uncle Dean, who had not spoken all evening, set his glass down and said, Has anyone here actually seen the trust documents? The entire room went silent. Valerie froze. Shirley stopped moving. Richard looked at Dean as if he had done something unexpected. Dean continued, I have some questions, and I think we should have answers before we start telling a 17-year-old what to do with her mother's estate. No one responded. The clock in the hallway ticked 5 times before Shirley cleared her throat and quickly changed the subject to Aunt Linda's bathroom renovation. However, the moment had already changed everything. Valerie's performance had been interrupted, and everyone at the table could feel it. A small crack had appeared in her story. After dinner, Dean found me outside in the driveway. I was leaning against Aunt June's car, waiting for the ride I had already planned. I had learned to always have a way to leave. Morgan, wait a moment, Dean said. He was 40 years old, the youngest of the 3 Ingram siblings. He worked as an accountant in Fredericksburg. He was known as the quiet one, the one who attended family gatherings, ate his meal, and left without causing any problems. I did not know him well. He said, I do not know the exact details of your mother's trust, but I understand how trusts work. If it is irrevocable and has an independent trustee, then no one can access it. Not through petitions, not through guardianship claims, nothing. I studied his face. Why are you telling me this? He looked back at the house. The kitchen light was still on, and I could see Valerie talking while Shirley nodded. Because your father called me last week. He asked me to help him find a way to access the trust. He wanted me to review the structure and find a loophole. I asked, what did you say? He looked directly at me and said, I said no. That is when I realized something was very wrong. My brother asked me to help him take his daughter's inheritance. I told him that is not who we are. I nodded slowly. My throat felt tight. Dean said, if your mother hired a lawyer, then you should trust that lawyer. Do not sign anything. Not one document. Nothing at all. I said, I will not. He reached out and briefly placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a short, awkward gesture, like someone who wanted to say more but did not know how. Then he walked back to his truck and drove away. I stayed in the driveway for a long time after he left. Only one person in that entire family had refused to go along with what was happening. Sometimes, one person is enough. Valerie used her final attempt on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting at the folding table in my room, working on my homework, when Brianna knocked on the door. She stood there looking uncomfortable, as if she did not want to say what she had come to say. Can I talk to you? She asked. I said, yes. She sat down on the edge of my cot. Her hands were clasped together, and she kept her eyes down. My mom says. She stopped, then tried again. Vale. Morgan, if you do not share the money, I will not be able to go to college. I will have to work at the diner. Is that what you want? The words sounded practiced, like she had been told exactly what to say. I could almost imagine Valerie standing outside in the hallway, guiding her line by line. Brianna, that is not your responsibility. And it is not mine either. Her eyes filled with tears. I know. She told me to say it. I said, I know she did. Brianna wiped her face and left the room without saying anything else. I heard her bedroom door close quietly. About 30 seconds later, Valerie appeared. She had been listening the entire time. Her face showed both victory and anger at once. Do you see what you did? You made her cry. You are heartless. You are just as cold as your mother. I stood up. The room was small, and Valerie stood in the doorway, but I looked directly at her. Something in my expression made her step back slightly. Do not ever speak about my mother again. Valerie's lips tightened. Or what? She asked. I answered, you will find out on Tuesday. She stared at me. I stared back. After 5 seconds, she turned and walked away, her heels making sharp sounds as she moved down the hallway. Tuesday was the day Drayton had arranged the meeting. Valerie did not know that yet. She had called my mother cold, my mother who had spent her final year building protection for her daughter. Cold. That word stayed with me. Tuesday, 10 a.m., the law office of Patricia Drayton on Main Street in Culpeper. I arrived with Aunt June at 9:45. Drayton met us in the hallway. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, and her reading glasses were in place. She looked like someone who had been prepared for this meeting for 18 months. Are you ready? She asked. I said, yes. She replied, good. Let me handle the conversation until I tell you otherwise. Richard and Valerie arrived exactly at 10. Valerie had dressed carefully for the meeting. She wore a pressed blouse, gold earrings, and lipstick. She carried a manila folder under her arm, filled with printed pages she had gathered from the internet. She entered the office as if she were attending a business meeting she expected to win. Richard looked different. He appeared smaller, uneasy. Sweat showed through his shirt, and he kept adjusting his collar. He shook Drayton's hand and said, thank you for meeting with us, in a tone that sounded like he was unsure of himself. The conference room was simple. There was an oak table with 4 chairs on each side and a window facing the street. A water pitcher sat in the center, but no one poured any water. Drayton's file folder, thick and organized with tabs and held together by a binder clip, was placed in front of her. It looked like something powerful that had not yet been used. Valerie chose the chair directly across from Drayton. She placed her manila folder on the table and rested both hands on top of it, as if trying to show confidence. It seemed like something she had planned in advance. Aunt June and I sat on the opposite side. June remained calm, and so did I. We both understood something that Richard and Valerie did not. This meeting was not a discussion. It was a clear statement of facts. Drayton sat at the head of the table. She adjusted her file, the real one, the one my mother had prepared, and looked at each of us one by one. Thank you for coming. I arranged this meeting because there appears to be confusion about the estate of Claire Ingram. I want to resolve that confusion today, clearly and completely. Valerie smiled, confident and prepared, as if she believed she had the advantage. Richard shifted in his chair and wet his lips nervously. June gently held my hand under the table. Drayton opened her folder. I want to make one thing clear from the beginning. I represent the trust of Claire Ingram. I do not represent Mr. Ingram or Mrs. Ingram. I represent the trust. My responsibility is to the document Claire created and to its sole beneficiary, her daughter Morgan. She glanced briefly at Valerie's folder and then back at her. Let us begin. Drayton read from the trust document with precision and calm control. Claire Ingram established an irrevocable trust on March 14, 2 years ago. The trust names me, Patricia Drayton, as the sole trustee. The sole beneficiary is Morgan Claire Ingram. The trust contains $400,000 in total assets. She turned to the next page. The distribution schedule is as follows. $50,000 will be released for educational expenses when the beneficiary turns 18. Additional distributions will occur at ages 21 and 25. All distributions require approval from the trustee. Valerie leaned forward and said, but Richard is her father. He has parental rights. Drayton looked at her calmly and said, parental rights do not apply to an irrevocable trust created by another party. Mr. Ingram is not the grantor, not the trustee, and not a beneficiary. He has no legal authority in this matter. Richard tried to speak, stopped, and then said, Claire never told me about this. Drayton replied, she was not required to inform you. Valerie's folder remained closed, but her hands tightened around it. Then we will hire a lawyer. We will challenge this. Drayton said, you are free to seek legal counsel. However, there is something you should know first. She took out a single sheet of paper. This office received a letter from First National Trust Services 3 weeks ago. It documents an unauthorized attempt to access Morgan's trust account. The caller identified herself as Valerie Ingram, legal guardian of Morgan Ingram. Valerie's face lost color immediately. The folder she had brought suddenly seemed unimportant. Richard looked at her with clear shock. It was the first time I had seen real surprise on his face in weeks. You contacted the bank? He asked. Valerie did not respond. Drayton continued, presenting yourself as a legal guardian in order to access a minor's protected trust is a serious matter. It could have federal consequences. Her voice remained steady and controlled. Valerie's hand moved to her neck, touching her earring, a nervous habit I had seen many times before. But this time, it was different. Veil. The expression on her face was the look of someone who walked into a room expecting to win, but then slowly realized, in that exact moment, that the door had already closed behind her and there was no way out. Richard leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. The petition for guardianship, the talks with Dean, the careful plan at Sunday dinner, all of it had become completely useless. Every single move they had made had already been predicted and blocked by a woman who had been gone for 6 months. June's hand tightened around mine. And Drayton was still not finished speaking. There is one additional item, Drayton said in a calm and steady voice. She reached into her folder and took out the cream-colored envelope. The same one she had given me weeks earlier. The one I had handed back to her that morning because I knew this was the right moment. Claire left a letter. It is addressed to Richard. She asked me to read it out loud in your presence at the appropriate time. Drayton looked directly at me. I gave a small nod. Richard pushed his chair back slightly. I do not need to hear it. Mom asked for this, I said quietly. Please. He looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time since I had moved into the house. After a moment, he slowly leaned back into his chair and folded his hands together. Drayton opened the envelope, unfolded the paper carefully, and began to read, Richard, if you are hearing this, then what I expected has already happened. I am gone, and someone in your life is trying to take what I left for our daughter. Valerie's jaw became tight. Richard did not move at all. I want you to understand that I do not hate you. I am not writing this with anger. I am writing this with clear understanding. I know who you are, Richard. I have always known. You are not a bad man, but you are a weak one. And weakness, when it is not controlled, causes the same damage as cruelty. Richard's eyes turned red, and his hands gripped the edge of the table tightly. I know that you will remarry. I know that the person you choose will look at what I built and see it as an opportunity. And I know that you will tell yourself that sharing is the right thing to do, because it is easier than standing up and protecting your daughter. Drayton's voice remained steady and controlled. The room was so quiet that I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. June's breathing beside me, and the slight sound of Richard's chair as he leaned forward. As if the words were pulling him in against his will. I know that you will tell yourself that sharing is the right thing to do, Because it is easier than standing up for your daughter. It has always been easier for you to agree than to take a stand. I once believed that was kindness. Now I understand that it is simply another word for cowardice. Richard made a small sound without meaning to. Like someone reacting to pain that had been hidden for a long time, but I am not writing this to punish you. I am writing this because our daughter should not have to face this world alone. She is strong, Richard. Stronger than you realize, possibly even stronger than me. But she is also 17, and she has just lost her mother. She deserves at least one parent who will always put her first. Drayton turned to the final paragraph. Her voice softened slightly, not from emotion, but from respect. It was the kind of tone used when reading the final words of someone who meant every single thing they said. I could not turn you into the father she deserved. But I could make sure she would be safe even without one. That is what this trust represents. It is not about money. It is about making sure our daughter always has a secure foundation that no one, not you, and not anyone who comes after me, can ever take away from her. She read the final line, do not be angry with Morgan. Be angry with yourself for making this letter necessary. Richard broke down completely. He covered his face with his hands and began to cry. In 17 years, I had never heard that sound from him. It was raw, unfiltered, and real. It was the sound of a man finally hearing the truth from a woman he had underestimated for his entire life. Valerie stood up quickly, grabbed her folder, and said, this is ridiculous. She walked out of the room. And the door slammed loudly behind her. Aunt June wrapped her arm around me. I held my mother's bracelet tightly and felt the locket press against my pulse. My mother had seen everything, even after she was gone. I need to pause here for a moment, because I know that some of you feel exactly what I felt while sitting in that room. If your parent ever chose someone else over you, if you have ever stayed quiet while others decided your value, I understand you. This story is not finished. That letter was only the beginning, not the end. Tell me honestly. Would you have opened that envelope, or would you have kept it closed forever? Stay with me, because what happened after Valerie walked out of that office was something I never expected. The parking lot was almost empty, with only 3 cars parked. Richard sat inside his truck with the engine turned off, both hands gripping the steering wheel. Staring forward without focus. I walked up to the truck, opened the passenger door, and sat down beside him. We did not speak for a full minute. The inside of the truck smelled like coffee and work gloves. A pine air freshener hung from the rearview mirror, completely dried out and no longer useful. I did not know she wrote that, he finally said. His voice sounded weak. Yes, you did, I replied. You just did not think she would actually say it out loud. He flinched slightly. It was small, but I noticed it. I am not going to fight you, Dad, I said calmly. But I am not giving you Mom's money. It is not mine to give. She placed it in a trust for a reason. She knew you would ask, and she made sure the answer would always be no, even if I was too afraid to say it myself. He kept staring through the windshield. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. I will stay in your house until I turn 18. That is 7 months. I will be respectful. I will clean up after myself. I will not cause any problems. But you need to understand something clearly. I am leaving the day I turn 18, and I will not come back. Where will you go? He asked. That is not your concern anymore. You made that clear a long time ago. I opened the door and stepped out. The gravel made a sharp sound under my shoes. Morgan, he said. I stopped walking. Your mother was. He paused and swallowed. She was always the stronger one. I know, I said. I closed the truck door and walked across the parking lot toward June's car. I did not look back. I could feel him watching me, but I did not turn around. He had 8 years to be my father. I thought Mom only had 2 years left, but she used every single day wisely. Ms. Drayton acted quickly. By the end of that same week, both Richard and Valerie received certified letters from her office. The wording was formal and precise, but the message was clear and direct. All communication related to the Claire Ingram Trust must go through the trustee. Any attempt to contact Morgan directly about financial matters, whether through family members or third parties, would be officially recorded and reported. Valerie received a separate letter. It included a copy of the bank's refusal and a written note. No further legal action will be taken at this time regarding the unauthorized inquiry. However, this documentation has been recorded and saved. Valerie understood exactly what that meant. One more mistake, and she would be explaining her actions to someone in law enforcement. The following Saturday, I sat in Drayton's office and signed the beneficiary acknowledgement form. It confirmed that I understood the trust terms, the payment schedule, and my legal rights. $50,000 would be released for education at 18, another portion at 21, and the remaining amount at 25. All managed by Drayton until that time. Your mother spent a great deal of time on this, Drayton said as she watched me sign. She revised the distribution terms 3 times. She wanted to make sure you had enough to begin your life, but not so much that you would stop working toward your future. That sounds like her, I said. Drayton smiled for the first time since I met her. It was brief, but genuine. She also left a note in the file. Veil. It was not a legal document, just a small sticky note written in her handwriting. It said, "Tell Morgan I am proud of her, even if she does not need to hear it." I pressed my pen firmly against the table, took a slow breath in, and then let it out. She was wrong about that, I said quietly. I really needed to hear it. Your mother did not only leave you money, Morgan. She left you protection, something strong like a wall. And no one was going to break through it. The story spread the way stories always do in small towns. Quickly, unevenly, and without anyone asking for permission, Uncle Dean told the truth first. He called Grandma Shirley that same evening after the meeting with the lawyer and explained everything clearly. The trust was secure and could not be challenged. Valerie had pretended to be a legal guardian to try to access a minor's account. And Richard had asked Dean to look for ways to get access to his own daughter's inheritance. Shirley called Richard that same night. I was in my room, but the walls in that house were thin, and her voice carried clearly even through the phone speaker. You allowed that woman to try to steal from your child? I could not hear Richard's reply, only a low, unclear sound from someone who no longer had any excuses left. Aunt Linda called me the next afternoon. Her voice sounded very different from before. It was softer and more careful. Morgan, I owe you an apology. I did not know the full situation. Valerie told us. Well, she told us something very different. I am sorry. Thank you, Aunt Linda. Your Uncle Dean helped us understand. He explained everything that really happened, about the bank and about the legal petition. I appreciate him. He is a good man. Better than his brother, if I am being honest. She paused for a moment. Listen, Morgan. If you ever need anything, you can call me. Do you understand? Okay. Thank you, Aunt Linda. And Morgan, your mother? I wish I had known her. She sounds like someone very special, someone worth knowing. By the next Sunday, Valerie was no longer invited to Shirley's dinner table. The invitation was only for Richard. He did not attend. He said he had to work. Everyone knew he did not work on Sundays. Shirley called me later that week. She did not mention money or the trust. She simply asked how school was going and told me she had saved a piece of her apple cobbler for me if I ever wanted to visit. It was the first normal conversation I had ever had with my grandmother. It should not have required a legal situation to reach that point, but that is what it took. The family did not fall apart all at once. Instead, it changed slowly, like a house settling after a storm. The damage had always been there, but now it could finally be seen. Shirley still cared about her son. Linda still answered his calls. But the trust they once had in his decisions was gone, and Valerie's name became something people spoke quietly, lowering their voices when they said it. Dean checked on me through text messages every couple of weeks. The messages were short. How is the library? Do you need anything? He was not a man who talked much, but he was trying to show support in the ways he could. I did not celebrate any of this. There is no victory in watching a family break apart, even one that never fully felt like mine. The house became quieter after the meeting. Not calm, just empty. Richard and Valerie argued behind their bedroom door. I could not hear the exact words, but I could recognize the pattern. Valerie's voice would rise quickly and sharply, while Richard's voice stayed low and flat. The arguments always ended the same way. A door would slam, and then the television would turn on too loud. One night, about 3 weeks after the meeting, I walked past the kitchen and heard Valerie speaking on the phone. She was talking to her own mother, and this time she was not pretending. Her real tone was clear. He is useless, she said. He cannot even get money from his own child. I married him because I believed he had potential. It turns out his dead wife was the one who had the real plan. I stood still in the hallway. Not making a sound. She laughed, but it was short and harsh. I should have checked his finances before the wedding. That was my mistake. Then she ended the call. I went back to my room before she could see me. That night, I understood something about Valerie that I had not fully seen before. Richard was never a partner to her. He was an investment that did not succeed. She had calculated what she expected to gain, and now that it did not work, she was ready to walk away from it. Richard, on the other hand, withdrew into himself. He came home from work, ate his meals in front of the television, and then went to bed. He stopped asking me about the trust. In fact, he stopped asking me anything at all. Around 11 that night, Brianna knocked softly on my door. Hey, she said quietly. Hey. She leaned against the door frame. For what it is worth, I think your mother sounds like an amazing person. I looked at her. She was someone who had been pulled into a situation she did not create, by a mother she could not control. She was, I said. She really was. Brianna nodded, and for a brief moment, in that difficult house, something kind passed between us. 7 months passed in the way difficult months usually do. They feel slow while you are living them, but fast when you look back. I focused on my routine. I went to school. I worked at the library. I studied for the SATs at the same table. near the window and scored a 1,380. Mrs. Cooper said that score would have made my mother very proud. I applied to Virginia Commonwealth University and was accepted. I received a half scholarship for academic performance, and the rest was covered by the Trust's education fund. I signed my dorm agreement during the same week I turned 18. During those 7 months, Valerie and I reached an unspoken understanding. We stayed out of each other's way. She stopped talking about the trust. She stopped mentioning my mother. Most of the time, she acted as if I was not there, which was easier than dealing with conflict. Richard moved through the house like someone not fully aware of his own life. He was physically present, but emotionally absent in every important way. Kyle also became quieter around me. I never knew if Dean had spoken to Richard about the bullying, or if Kyle simply lost interest. Either way, that incident was the last of it. Brianna and I shared small, quiet interactions. A simple nod in the hallway. A shared look when Valerie raised her voice. A quiet good luck on the morning of my SATs. We never spoke about the trust again. There was no need. Drayton released the first $50,000 on my 18th birthday. I opened my own bank account. My name. My signature. No one else's. The bank teller asked if I wanted to add a parent or guardian. I said no. On the morning I left, I packed the same 2 suitcases I had arrived with, along with the wooden box that held my mother's belongings and the journal, now dry. The ink had faded in some places, but it could still be read. Everything I owned fit into 2 bags. That used to make me feel sad. Now it made me feel free. Richard stood by the front door. He held a cup of coffee in his hand, and he looked older than 45. The energy had left him months earlier. If it had ever truly been there at all. Morgan. I stopped at the front step, holding a suitcase in each hand. I know I do not have the right to say this, but good luck. Vale. And if you want another story with the same kind of strength, I have linked one in the description. It is about a woman whose in-laws tried to take her business. A different situation, but the same determination. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I looked directly at him. My father. The man who left my mother, the man who allowed his wife to try to take my inheritance. The man who, in 7 full months, never once said the words, "I am sorry." He stood in the doorway of a house that now felt too large for him, holding a cup of coffee that he would likely forget to finish. Goodbye, Dad. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something more, but no words came out. Whatever he wanted to say was trapped somewhere between his pride and his shame, and neither would let it pass. I walked to Aunt June's car, placed my bags inside, and sat down. June rested her hand on mine and said softly, "Are you ready?" "Yes," I said. She slowly drove out of the driveway. I watched the house grow smaller in the side mirror. I did not slam any doors. I simply closed them quietly, the way my mother always did. My dorm room at Virginia Commonwealth University was 8 foot x 12 feet. It had 1 bed, 1 desk, and a small closet that could hold only 4 hangers. Me. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. I hung my mother's photo on the wall above my desk. It was the one from my 6th birthday, where she had her arms around me and both of us were laughing at something outside the frame of the camera. I placed the wooden box on my nightstand. And every morning I wore her bracelet like a small daily ritual. College life was simple in the best possible way. Classes, meals in the dining hall, and a roommate named Tessa who played her music too loud and apologized every single time. I chose English as my major because writing was the only thing that made me feel close to my mother. And she had always said that the world needed more people who could speak and write the truth clearly. I joined the campus literary magazine and wrote a personal essay for my freshman composition class about trust, both the legal kind and the emotional kind. My professor wrote in the margin, "This is ready for publication." I did not submit it anywhere. The story was not finished yet. Aunt June visited from Culpeper once a month. She brought containers of food and stories I never asked for but always appreciated. She would sit on my dorm bed and tell me about my mother when she was younger. How Claire once drove 3 hours through a snowstorm to deliver June's forgotten science project to school. How Claire had once applied to law school before deciding to go into education instead. She would have been a very intimidating lawyer, June said one time, laughing. But she loved children more than courtrooms. Drayton sent quarterly trust statements. They were clean, organized, and professional, exactly the way my mother would have wanted. Each one included a short handwritten note, "Investments are performing well. No irregular activity. Your mother would be proud of your academic performance." Drayton never crossed any boundaries. She was the trustee, not family. But those small notes meant more than she probably realized. Then in November, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." It was from Brianna. "Hello, Morgan. I was accepted into Piedmont Community College. I am paying for it myself through loans, work study, and tips from my job at the diner. I will be honest, it is difficult. But I want you to know that I am glad you did not give in. If you had, my mother would have spent that money within a year, and I would still be in the same situation. This way, at least I know that what I earn belongs to me. Thank you for standing your ground. I read the message 3 times, then I closed my laptop and looked at my mother's photo. Your trust did not only protect me, Mom. It protected futures you never even imagined. The handwritten letter arrived 6 months after I left home. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was blocky and slightly tilted to the left. My father's handwriting had not changed since the birthday cards he stopped sending when I was 10. I opened it while standing in the mailroom of my dorm, next to a recycling bin and a bulletin board filled with campus event flyers. It was not a dramatic setting. But life does not always create perfect moments. The letter was short. Only 1 page. Morgan, I read your mother's letter again last night. That makes it the 3rd time this month. She was right about everything. I was weak. I am still weak. I allowed Valerie to make decisions that were mine to make, and I let you suffer the consequences. I am sorry that I was not the father your mother believed you deserved. I am trying to become better. I have started seeing a counselor. Valerie and I separated in October. She took the children and moved to her mother's house in Richmond. The house is quiet now, too quiet. I do not expect you to believe me. I do not expect you to respond. I only want you to know that I finally listened to your mother. It may be too late, but I heard her. He signed it, Dad. I stood in the mailroom for a long time. The fluorescent light above me made a quiet buzzing sound. A girl from the 3rd floor came in, picked up a package, and left without noticing me. Life has a way of continuing, moving around pain the way water moves around a rock. I did not write back, not because I was angry, and not because I did not believe him. In some ways, I did believe him. The counseling, the separation, and the fact that he kept reading my mother's letter. Those were the actions of someone who was finally trying to change. Even if it was late, but forgiveness is not something you give immediately when someone asks for it. It is something that develops slowly over time, like something you grow with care. I was not ready. Maybe I would be ready next year, or the year after that. Maybe one day I would sit across from him in a small diner, let him buy me coffee, and talk about simple things. Or maybe that day would never come. I took the letter with me, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the wooden box next to my mother's bracelet and the birthday card she gave me when I turned 15. I did not throw it away. That meant something. Even if I did not fully understand what it is. Spring now, the trees outside my dorm window are coming back to life. The way things do when given enough time and enough light. I am sitting at my desk. My mother's photo is in front of me, and her bracelet rests warmly against my wrist. The locket is open. A picture of me at 4 years old smiles up from her lap, completely unaware of everything that would come. Later. I close it gently. My mother did not teach me how to fight. She taught me something more difficult. She taught me how to prepare. She taught me that some battles do not require shouting, expensive lawyers, or public revenge. Sometimes they require a woman sitting at her kitchen table with a notebook and a clear mind, building protection for her daughter long before it is needed. If someone ever tells you that loving your family means giving away what belongs to you, that is not love, that is control. You do not owe anyone your inheritance, you do not owe anyone your boundaries, and you do not owe anyone your silence. My mother could not be there to protect me in person. So she put everything in writing. She placed it in a trust that could not be broken. She wrote a letter that said everything I was not old enough to say myself, and that was enough. I opened my laptop and began to type. I am telling this story because my mother cannot, and because someone is sitting at a kitchen table, being told that family means giving up what belongs to them. It does not. It never did. My name is Morgan Ingram. I am 18 now. I have my mother's bracelet, my mother's trust, and my mother's strength, and for the first time in my life, I am exactly where she wanted me to be. That is my story. If it reached you, if you have ever had to stand your ground while the people who were supposed to protect you asked you to stay silent, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me what boundary you set that changed your life, and thank you for staying until the end. Vale.